Einen schönen guten Morgen zusammen. Wie viel doch das ausmacht, wenn man das Licht abdunkelt. Manchmal wünschte ich mir, das wäre im Klassenzimmer auch so einfach. Nur etwas das Licht dunkeln und sofort sind alle ruhig. Ja, ich darf Sie und darf euch alle ganz herzlich willkommen heißen und begrüßen zu diesem Vormittag hier in der Lindenhalle. Und zwar in Vertretung von Frau Greiner-Nitschke vom Kulturamt Ehingen. Die ist leider erkrankt und hat mich gebeten, euch willkommen zu heißen und den Anfang dieses Vormittags hier zu übernehmen. Und das möchte ich sehr gerne tun. Ich möchte vor allem zwei Personen willkommen heißen und begrüßen, die schon seit ein paar Tagen in der Stadt sind, die gestern auch schon hier waren. Zum einen der Fotograf Maurice Schoeller, der dieses Projekt, dessen Name wir hier sehen, Survivors, Faces of Life After the Holocaust, der das initiiert hat mit anderen zusammen. Lieber Herr Schoeller, schön, dass Sie da sind, dass wir Einblick bekommen in Ihre wunderbaren Fotos. Und ganz besonders freue ich mich, dass Maurice Gluck hier ist, aus Tel Aviv angereist, aus Israel. Welcome to Germany, welcome in Ehingen. It's nice to have you here in this small town in Swabia. And I hope you like our small town, and we are very glad to have you around here. And we are excited to get to know your story, what you have to tell us about your life. So welcome. Und mit den beiden gekommen ist Frau Anke Degenhardt, die Kuratorin der Ausstellung. Die Ausstellung ist ja noch zu sehen, die nächsten Wochen hier in Ehingen. Und an der Stelle auch die Bitte an alle Geschichtskolleginnen und Kollegen der Schulen, die heute hier sind. Nehmen Sie das wahr, gehen Sie mit Ihren Klassen in die Ausstellung in der Galerie hier in Ehingen. Es lohnt sich. Ich war gestern dort, habe die Fotos gesehen, die Porträts. Es ist wirklich ein Besuch wert. Also herzlich willkommen allen heute Morgen hier. Ja, es ist eine einmalige Gelegenheit, die ihr Schülerinnen und Schüler der Ehinger Schulen hier habt, einen Zeitzeugen kennenzulernen, der als kleines Kind die furchtbaren Ereignisse miterlebt hat, als das Naziregime unseren ganzen Kontinent in einen furchtbaren Krieg gestürzt hat, millionenfaches systematisches Ermorden der jüdischen Bevölkerung durchgeführt hat. Und es leben nicht mehr viele der Menschen, die damals dabei waren, die das erlebt haben. Herr Gluck war damals ein kleines Kind, aber er hat gute Erinnerung an das oder eine starke Erinnerung an das, was er erlebt hat, was ihm begegnet ist, und er wird euch das nachher aus seinem Leben erzählen. 75 Jahre nach der Befreiung des Konzentrationslagers und Vernichtungslagers Auschwitz-Birkenau ist diese Ausstellung entstanden. 75 Jahre, das ist ein ganzes Leben. Ein Leben, in dem, wenn ihr dann mal auch 75 Jahre hinter euch habt, viel erlebt haben werdet. Ein ganzes Menschenleben, das geprägt ist von vielen positiven Dingen, aber auch von vielen schweren Momenten, Glücksmomente, berufliche Erfolge, ebenso wie schmerzvolle Erfahrungen, Leiterfahrungen, Verlust von lieben Menschen. Auch davon wird Herr Gluck uns nachher erzählen. Schicksalsschläge, all das sind Dinge, die ein ganzes Leben prägen. Und mich beeindruckt vor allem, dass Herr Gluck nach so vielen Lebensjahren, und er ist noch ein rüstiger Mann, hat sicher auch noch etliche Jahre vor sich, ihr werdet das nachher erleben, steht noch mitten im Leben sozusagen, aber dass er nach all dem, was er erlebt hat, sehr positiv etwas sagen kann. Denn wenn ihr die Ausstellung besucht, dann werdet ihr sehen, dass neben seinem Porträt ein Zitat hängt. Und das Zitat von ihm, was er dem Herrn Schoeller mitgegeben hat, als dieses Porträt entstanden ist, lautet wie folgt: Vergiss nie, aber versuche zu vergeben. Auf dieser Welt gibt es gute und schlechte Menschen, versuche die Guten zu finden. Never forget, but try to forgive. Never forget, but try to forgive. Und so wie ich Sie gestern auch schon kennengelernt habe, Gluck, scheint mir das auch in etwas Ihr Lebensmotto zu sein. Die Erinnerung wachhalten an das, was geschehen ist, an das, was einen geprägt hat, ist wichtig, denn die Erinnerung an die Geschichte macht unsere Identität von heute aus. Wenn wir nicht wissen oder wenn wir vergessen, was uns geprägt hat, was wir erlebt haben, dann verlieren wir einen Teil von uns selbst. Also das nie vergessen ist wichtig, aber dennoch auch nach vorne zu schauen und versuchen zu vergeben, für Versöhnung einzutreten. Und sehr nett, auch sehr positiv auch formuliert das Zitat: Auf dieser Welt gibt es gute und schlechte Menschen. Es wird Menschen geben, die dir Schlechtes antun, Schlimmes antun. Aber versuche du, die Guten zu finden. Try to find the good ones in your life. Es hat mich sehr beeindruckt, Herr Gluck, dieses Zitat, was Sie dort neben Ihrem Porträt zu sehen ist. Ja, damit bringen Sie auch etwas zum Ausdruck, was wir als Schulen tun möchten. Ich bin selbst kein Geschichtelehrer, aber einige von Ihnen sind heute hier. Wir wollen in unserem Umgang mit der Geschichte, in unserem Umgang mit Schuld und Versagen, mit dem Umgang der schrecklichen Ereignisse, die unseren Kontinent geprägt haben, vor so langer Zeit, wollen wir die Erinnerung wachhalten, damit wir vermeiden können, dass so etwas wieder passiert. Und wenn wir nach Europa schauen, wenn wir Richtung Ukraine schauen, dann sehen wir, dass das aktueller ist denn je. Dass Menschen von heute auf morgen in Leid gestürzt werden, schlimme Erfahrungen machen müssen. Und umso wichtiger ist es, dass wir davon erzählen, wie es zu so etwas kommen konnte und was das mit Menschen macht. Und das werden wir hören von Herrn Gluck, das werden wir auch sehen in den Fotos. Wir werden gleich einen Film zu Beginn schauen, wo ihr Einblick bekommt, wie diese Ausstellung entstanden ist. Und Herr Schoeller lebt eigentlich in New York, wird nachher auch das Ganze auf Englisch stattfinden. Ihr dürft also auch keine Scheu haben, einfach auf Englisch oder Fragen zu stellen. Herr Schoeller ist nach Tel Aviv, nach Israel gereist, hat 75 Personen fotografiert, hat mit ihnen geredet, auch das sieht man im Film, hat also nicht nur Fotos gemacht, sondern hat auch die Lebensgeschichte dieser Menschen kennengelernt. Und das wollen wir uns jetzt anschauen, wie das Ganze entstanden ist in einem Film. Und anschließend würde ich Ihnen, Frau Degenhardt, Herrn Schoeller, Herr Gluck, das Wort übergeben, dass Sie uns mit hineinnehmen in dieses Projekt Survivors. In diesem Sinne jetzt Film ab.
So, guten Morgen. Ich hoffe, ihr hört mich. Herr Sam, herzlichen Dank für die gute Einführungsrede. Ich finde das total toll. Seit ich in der Schule war, habe ich nicht mehr so viele Schüler gesehen. Also ich bin Anke Degenhardt. Ich hoffe, ich darf euch duzen. Ich habe mit Martin Schoeller vor 3 Jahren die Ausstellung in Israel produziert, weil es uns so wichtig ist, und dazu werden beide, natürlich als erster jetzt mal Martin, der euch etwas von sich und seiner Arbeit im Generellen und dann die Idee und die Wichtigkeit auch für sein Leben erklären, warum wir dieses Projekt gemacht haben. Und Martin ist, wie gesagt, aus New York angereist und wir freuen uns, unseren Freund Maurice Gluck dabei zu haben, der aus Tel Aviv gekommen ist. Und ihr habt ihn im Film ja sicherlich eben auch schon erkannt. Einfach nochmal sehr bewegend, persönliche Erfahrung in seinem Leben euch mitteilen möchte. Für mich selber ist es so, ich war da ja dabei und ich muss sagen, in den Tagen, die wir fotografiert haben, habe ich viel geweint. Und mir kommen auch jetzt fast wieder die Tränen, weil einfach dieses menschliche Schicksal, was den Menschen eben hier widerfahren ist, uns sehr berührt hat. Und ich glaube, wir müssen verhindern alle, und dazu brauchen wir euch eben auch, die Jugend von heute, dass sowas jemals wieder passieren kann. Und nun gebe ich einfach ganz fröhlich an Martin weiter, der nämlich einfach jetzt mal über sich und über das Projekt viel besser erzählen kann als ich. Ich freue mich, dass ihr alle hier seid.
Ja, ich schließe mich da an. Schön, dass ihr alle hier seid. Es ist kein guter Einklang zum Tag, glaube ich. So ein Video zu sehen ist doch ziemlich intensiv. Ich lebe seit 30 Jahren in New York und fotografiere meistens für Magazine. Ich habe ein paar Fotos mitgebracht, wenn man die vielleicht abspielen kann. Und für Rolling Stone und Vanity Fair, Schauspieler, alle möglichen verschiedenen prominenten Menschen. Und das sind immer Auftragsarbeiten. Also Leute denken, ich bin mit Meryl Streep oder George Clooney befreundet. Das ist nicht der Fall, sondern ein Magazin, ein Schauspieler muss etwas verkaufen, einen Film bewerben und dann kommen Magazine und sagen, sie machen eine Geschichte über diese berühmte Person, kann auch Drake oder Lady Gaga sein. Und dann komme ich ins Spiel, das Magazin ruft bei mir an und sagt, ja, ob ich nicht fotografieren könnte. Das ist also wirklich fast wie so eine Business Transaction. Es geht um Sachen zu verkaufen, letztendlich doch immer. Platten, Filme, Bücher oder Schauspieler oder Politiker wollen wiedergewählt werden. Ihr habt vielleicht, manche von euch haben ein ähnliches Gefühl, aber ich bin in Deutschland in den 80er, 90er Jahren aufgewachsen. Und ich glaube, so meine Generation war die erste Generation, die sehr mit dem Holocaust, mit dem Dritten Reich konfrontiert wurde. Die Generation von meiner Mutter, die waren der ganzen Sache, glaube ich, noch zu nah. Das waren ja die Kinder der Menschen, die diese Gräueltaten vollbracht haben. Aber bei meiner Generation war das dann wirklich von morgens bis abends in der Schule, im Geschichtsunterricht, Englischunterricht, Deutschunterricht, war das ununterbrochen Drittes Reich. Vor allen Dingen meine Schule, glaube ich, war eine sehr linksgerichtete Schule. Und ich habe fast ein Schuldgefühl entwickelt. Also ich habe so das Gefühl, auf mir lastet eine Schuld, obwohl ich natürlich damit überhaupt nichts zu tun hatte. Und habe mich dann immer wieder gefragt, was hätte ich gemacht? Hätte ich die Kraft und den Mut gehabt, diesen Verbrechen ins Auge zu sehen? Unter der Gefahr, selber umgebracht zu werden, wäre ich ein Widerstandskämpfer gewesen, wie Sophie Scholl oder Bonhoeffer oder von Stauffenberg. Hätte ich überhaupt die Situation erkannt, klar genug erkannt, wenn ich zu der Zeit gelebt hätte? Natürlich macht es keinen Sinn, darüber so viel nachzudenken, weil wir werden nie in dieser Position sein. Aber ich habe daraus mitgenommen, mich dafür einzusetzen, dass man eben den Holocaust nicht vergisst. Und gab auch andere Verbrechen. Viele sagen ja auch immer, warum immer wieder der Holocaust. Aber das ist eben unsere Geschichte als Deutsche. Wir haben ja mit Sklaverei wenig zu tun oder mit anderen Verbrechen, die es in der Menschheitsgeschichte gab. Deswegen, glaube ich, ist es unsere Verantwortung, uns über unsere Geschichte nachzudenken und daraus zu lernen. Und mal sehen, was wollte ich noch sagen? Ja, und natürlich war das da saß ich nachts in der Kneipe nach viel zu viel Rotwein um 2 Uhr morgens mit Kai Diekmann, den ich durch Anke kannte und habt ihr im Film vielleicht auch schon gehört. Ich habe eine jüdische Frau geheiratet. Kai Diekmann setzt sich für Yad Vashem ein in Jerusalem. Und dann kam uns die Idee, anlässlich 75 Jahre Befreiung des Konzentrationslager Auschwitz-Birkenau, doch 75 Holocaust-Überlebende zu fotografieren, um 75 Jahre, 75 Überlebende. Und dann hat sich das angeboten, das in Yad Vashem zu machen. Yad Vashem ist die offizielle Holocaust-Gedenkstätte in Jerusalem. Die haben diese ganzen 75 Überlebenden eingeladen. Das hat es natürlich für mich als Fotograf sehr einfach gemacht, weil ich habe dann auf diesem Vertrauen, was diese Überlebenden für diese Institution haben, aufbauen können. Also ich musste mich da gar nicht großartig erklären oder die Leute überreden, mitzumachen. Die wussten ja von vornherein schon, sie werden eingeladen, was auf sie zukommt. Die haben schon meine Close-Up-Porträts gesehen, wussten also genau, wie schrecklich meine Fotos sind. Es ist ja doch eine große Herausforderung, so nah fotografiert zu werden. Die sind ja nicht gerade irgendwie, ich retuschiere meine Bilder ja nicht und die Menschen sehen so aus, wie sie aussehen. Und wenn man vor allem ein bisschen älter ist, sind ja nicht unbedingt vorteilhaft, meine Bilder. Also es gehört auch ein großer Mut dazu, sich fotografieren zu lassen. Und ja, und dann hat die Ausstellung, gab es zum ersten Mal zu sehen in Essen am 26. Januar, weil am 27. Januar 1945 sind 2 russische Soldaten mit einem Maschinengewehr auf dem Schlitten durch die Tore von Auschwitz gelaufen. Die sowjetischen Truppen hatten keine Ahnung, was sie da finden werden, haben Auschwitz-Birkenau eigentlich zufällig im Wald gefunden. Und es gab vorher noch, in der Gegend gab es noch Kämpfe, da sind noch einige russische Soldaten gestorben. Und Martha, die auch im Film kennengelernt hat, noch eine kleine Anekdote, die Russen haben dann später gemerkt, wie wichtig das jetzt ist, was sie da gefunden haben, was da passiert ist. Und haben dann 6 Wochen später ein Filmteam dahin geschickt, um die Befreiung von Auschwitz nachzustellen. Und da ist eben auch das Foto entstanden, mit Martha am Stacheldrahtzaun. Also es ist nicht direkt nach der Befreiung entstanden und deswegen sagt sie, haben wir auch längere Haare, weil uns wurden immer die Haare geschnitten, aber es war halt 6 Wochen später, nachdem das Lager befreit wurde. Ja, das war, ihr lernt ja auch viel über der Schule, über diese Zeiten und das war natürlich sehr intensiv, diese Menschen zu treffen, diese Geschichte, die ich in der Schule gelernt habe, durch Augenzeugen erzählt zu bekommen und deswegen freue ich mich sehr. I'm honored. I'll have to switch over to English. I hope you all paid attention in English classes. I'm honored to have Maurice here, who was born in 1939 and can tell you about those times in person. Please welcome Maurice.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. Well, I think you've heard everything, so what shall I tell you? I'm Israeli, first of all, even an officer in the Israeli army in reserves. I was born 1939 in Antwerp, Belgium, and okay, short history. My parents came originally from Romania. My father was what you call it in German, Gastarbeiter in Belgium. He married my mother, Sarah, who also came from Romania, and they used to speak Yiddish at home, which is the first language I heard, and they called me Moishele. That's my name in Yiddish. 1940, May 1940, Germans invaded Belgium, also Holland, France, but my parents tried to escape. I was 8 months old at the time. They fled towards the French border, but the Germans were mechanized, they were much faster, they got there first, so they couldn't, my parents had to return to Antwerp. Under the Nazi regime, first of all, Jews had to register in a separate Jewish register with their address and their names. I have a copy, I mean, maybe you can see that this is what Jewish registration card looked like. This is what I looked like when I was a kid, 2 years old already. Okay, things got worse and worse. In the summer of 1942, it was clear that the Germans were going to arrest every Jew they could find, so people tried to hide. My mother took me, with the help of a friend, to Brussels, because it was too dangerous for both my parents to travel at the time. So mother brought me to Antwerp to the Van den Stock family, who hid for 3 years at their home. She returned to Antwerp. I never saw her again. My parents were arrested a few days later and sent to Auschwitz on transport number 12. Transport number 12 had 999 Jews on it. Father was number 768, mother was number 769, if I remember correctly. From that shipment, only 78 people came back, which means that more than 90% died. My mother was sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz in 1st of December 1943. She survived more than a year, but she didn't make it. Father did survive 4 different concentration camps and a death march at the end of the war. He got to Buchenwald in January 1945 and was liberated by the Americans when they arrived in April 1945. Father was very sick, so he was flown to Belgium to a military hospital. immediately when he arrived, he called Van den Stock. He had remembered the phone number all during the year. And Van den Stock went to pick him up. They sent me to town so I shouldn't meet him when he arrived because he was in very, very bad shape. He was such a bad shape that when I saw him, of course, I had forgotten that I had once had parents of my own. I also had forgotten my Yiddish. I spoke French, like Van den Stock's. Father was in his bath. Van den Stock had prepared a bath for him, and when I came home, it was a big surprise. And when Father saw me, he wanted to hug me, but he looked so bad that I just ran away. But before that, Van den Stock just managed to say, "Look, Maurice, this is your father." And I had a complete blackout for weeks and months after that. But I got to live with Father after a few months, not far from Van den Stock, and Father put me in boarding school. First time, I was 6 years old, and it was the very first time in my life that I met other children, and it was not a pleasant experience. You know, everybody had went to a war one way or another. It was not, so they were not really friendly. And I wasn't quite happy. But anyway, lasted a few months, almost a year as a matter of fact, because in April of 1946, I had a big surprise. We came home after supper, and there was this British woman soldier came out, and when she saw me, she called me Schüler, and she hugged me and began to cry. I didn't understand what was going on, and she spoke Yiddish, which I had forgotten. And she hugged my father. They both started to cry, and they spoke for a long time, but first they put me to bed. In the morning, when I woke up, there was my father and a woman soldier next to my bed. And Father said, "Look, Maurice, this is your mother, Helen. She now came back from the war." And I had forgotten completely what had happened before, so I was very happy that I now had both a father and a mother, all of my own. I was quite happy. Of course, they got me out of boarding school to a normal school. A year later, my younger brother, Henry, was born. In 1950, we immigrated to Israel. In 1953, we went back to Belgium because my father somehow didn't manage quite well in Israel. And I didn't like it at all in Belgium because I had started to feel like an Israeli after 3 years in Israel. And I very much hope that we'd go back as soon as possible, but it took quite a while. 1961, I immigrated again to Israel on my own, did my military service in Israel, met my future wife in the army. She was also in the army. We got married, had children, 3 children, now 10 grandchildren altogether. More or less a normal life, shall I tell you. One last thing, in 1994, May of 1994, almost 50 years after the war had ended, there was a big ceremony organized by Yad Vashem in Brussels at the big old municipality building. Was very, well, let's say very nice ceremony. And the Van den Stock family, Van den Stock, his companion, his daughter, were all recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. Later, I had Emma come over to Israel. There was another ceremony at Yad Vashem, and I kept in touch with Emma until she died in 2006. I didn't have much contact with her son, her only son, who died 2 years later, but Emma's grandchildren, who at the time lived in Brussels, now moved to Lausanne. And tomorrow I'm going to go and meet them in Lausanne. Thank you very much for coming. And I think you may have some questions, so I'll be happy to answer as much as I can. Thank you.
Ich wollte euch noch sagen, wenn sich jemand wohler fühlt, eine Frage in Deutsch zu stellen, dann übersetzen wir die auch gerne und Maurice versteht auch ein bisschen Deutsch.
Yeah, you probably don't know what righteous among the nations means. Yad Vashem gives that honor to people that during the Second World War, during the Nazi era, helped Jewish people, helped fight the Nazis. So it's a big honor to have that title. And the family that was Van der Stock, the family that hid Maurice, you know, they could have been killed themselves. If they would have been found out that they were hiding Maurice, they would all have gone to the concentration camp themselves. Maurice, tell us about your blue eyes, the story about you as a child.
Thank you. I was blonde once, and I was 4 years old. Van der Stock was selling spices whoever wanted to buy, and while the Nazis were in Belgium, they also needed all sorts of things for their troops. So they were dealing also with Van der Stock. But of course, I knew nothing of that. But I had a lot of imagination. I didn't have many toys, but I had, you know, they had wooden toys at the time. We're talking about the 1940s. And I had this big wooden block, which I imagined to be a nice truck traveling around the country or the world. And I was going back and forth with my wooden block. And it was in the Van der Stock's office, which was next to his store. And I wasn't aware of anything around me, but then all of a sudden the door opened, Van der Stock came in, and there was this German officer with him. They were talking, and of course I was terrified, so I didn't know what to do. I couldn't run away because the door was blocked by the officer. So I ran and hid under the table in the corner of the room. And the German officer, a nice man, he looked down at me. As I said, I was blonde at the time, still blue eyes, same blue eyes. And he said, "Was für ein schönes arisches Kind." Yes, I was lucky. Okay, Van der Stock said, "Go play inside the house," and that was the end of it. But since then, Van der Stock used to call me Maurice Sosiske Ballekeskoppe, you stupid little Maurice.
Cabbage head, right? Kohlkopf. Du kleiner dummer Kohlkopf. Maybe if anyone has any questions, I know Maurice's stories, but maybe you have anything specific, anything you want to know from any of us, now is the time.
Yeah, we prepared some questions on some sheets.
Okay.
And we split them among the classes. So I would like to ask you what gave you comfort and support during that time of the war.
You mean when I was hidden?
Yes.
I arrived at Van der Stock when I was 3 years old and stayed there until I was 5.5. I had no knowledge of the war. I know there were bad people I should avoid. I was free to run around the house, the garden, and the spices store, but strangers should not see me. But otherwise, I wasn't aware of anything special. And Van der Stok was very nice to me. I mean, so I was a normal kid, really.
Did they take you in as their own kid? Did they say, "Oh, this is our son," or?
No, I was a nephew from some lost parents during the war, Belgian parents, supposedly, and that was enough. There was no problem. Like Van der Stok said, I mean, when the officer saw me, he said, "Ja, das ist mein dummer Neffe."
And were you able to walk around the town? Were you able to leave the house? Or?
No. The truth is, I didn't even see the front of the house until after the war, because I was always at the back. But it was nice. I mean, nothing special. You know, kids sort of manage any situation. You just adapt. Simple.
But without your blue eyes and your blonde hair, it would have been more difficult, right?
Come on, Martin. It would have been more difficult without Van der Stok. But as I keep repeating every time, they're bad people, they're good people, there are lots of people in between. If you can find the good ones, try and find the good ones. And Van der Stok was really, he was a stern man, but a very good man. When my father, after the war, wanted to pay him for hiding me and, you know, at least the expenses that I incurred, he said, "No, I mean, this is ridiculous. I did what I did," said Van der Stok, as a friend. And which he didn't say, but he mentioned it later, that he didn't really like the Germans. Or like Bert said, he very much did not like the Germans, those Germans at the time. But as I said, there are all sorts. That's it? No more questions?
I have a feeling there's a lot of them.
Go ahead. Excuse me, could you please speak louder?
As you said, you think there are good people and also people in between and bad people. Do you think that there were any people in the Nazi regime that were good people but just followed orders?
Better than that. I have a friend in Israel who, her mother just gave her over to a German officer from the ghetto. And the German officer brought her to his family. They were Volksdeutsche, I think. They raised a child. When the man's father asked, "What is this child?" And he said, "Well, it's from, you know, from the Virgin Mary." And it's not the end of the story, because at the end of the war, when the Russians arrived, they wanted to destroy the village of those Volksdeutsche. They told the Russians about that miraculous Jewish child that had become a saint. They actually even had erected a big cross on the hill next to the village. And they told the Russians, "You see, I mean, we were not Nazis, or at least we didn't do anything bad. On the contrary, so." That lady, who's now just 82, recently she became a dancer and a dance teacher, and she told us that someone, a journalist or something, tried and actually managed to find that village and he arranged, or they arranged, to invite her back to the village, and there's a big celebration for, what's her name again? Saint something. And she was very proud of that. So there are good people, yes. I'm sorry, I keep giving long answers to short questions, but go ahead.
No, thank you.
Yes.
What like you say your 5 years old self?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What do you like to say your 5 years old self? If you meet your 5-year-old self.
Oh, what would you like to tell yours? If
Myself.
You met your 5-year-old self.
Yes, that I was lucky, very lucky, all my life, as a matter of fact. I'm 83, I'm here, and I'm still lucky.
Yeah.
How was the political situation after the war? Because I can imagine, like, you faced a lot of discrimination, maybe because you were Jewish. So how was it after the war?
Okay, if I understand your question, kids don't do much politics, you know. There's way two camps, I mean, we, them. But I was not very social. I mean, I grew up without other children, so I really didn't have that interaction. But there was ideology. My second mother, Helen, told me much later that she, as a young girl, believed in communism. Communism was going to save the world, everybody would be equal, and the Jews would also have their part. Somehow that didn't quite materialize, so after the war, after Father and Helen married, had another boy, my younger brother, they decided to move to Israel. And I very much, how shall I say, felt part of being Israeli. Israel at the time, we talk in the early 1950s, was a socialist country. So I felt very much as one of the people. Not just that, but I must tell you that Comrade Stalin, we called him Uncle Stalin in Israel, was the father of all workers of the world. And when Stalin died in 1953, I was then 12 years old, no, 13 already. I cried for Uncle Stalin's death. But it's all right, I got over it.
Now you know better. You wouldn't cry over Stalin anymore, I think.
No, not over Putin either.
Do you think that there are parallels between the situation back then and political or societal orientations now?
Between the politics of then with what?
So if there's, we had a hard time hearing you.
Wait.
Do you think that there are parallels between the situation back then and political or societal orientations now?
Of what orientation?
I think if there's parallels between back then and now, if you see any of the anti-Semitism coming back, or hate or racism, or
Good for rephrasing the question. I have a very long answer for that, but I'll try and make it shorter. Anti-Semitism has always existed and probably will, most probably, still exist for quite some time. People in general don't like strangers. It is true everywhere. And Jews are everywhere. you know, now there's a Jewish state called Israel, which I'm very proud of, being part of it. But yes, anti-Semitism is sort of growing back. Again, to make a very, very long story short, I would say that whenever something is not unusual happens or situation is getting worse wherever you live, you try to find people who are responsible. So is the others. So I'm afraid you still have to, and you have a job, all of you. And that is to remember that people who are different are still people, and trying to find a way to connect instead of just rejecting others. By the way, we have the same problem in Israel with Arabs. Some Arabs, I have some Arab friends who want to integrate into the state of Israel, and they're part of it. And there are others who murder people in the streets, or wherever they can find them. So you have to be strong and also have an open mind and try and find solutions. Not everybody agrees with me, I'm sure. But still, I think it's a duty each one of us has, and each one of you has, is that to try and find a bridge between you and the others. Try to understand. You don't always have to agree, but try to understand the other person. Try to talk, not to argue, not to shout, to talk. Try to understand. You may disagree, that's fine, but try to talk. It's most important. That was a long answer, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you know, I think it's a very interesting subject, and I feel like a lot of times when I've met or when I read about people that are anti-Semitic, they also confuse bad Israeli foreign policies with being Jewish. You know, there's more Jewish people in the world that don't live in Israel than Jews that do live in Israel. And in Israel, just like in Germany, everybody has a different political opinion. You know, you should never make the mistake of confusing Judaism with Israel. You know, Judaism is a religion that is shared by many people around the world, and Israel is a country like Germany. It's like, you know, you can't say Germans are all the same. We come in many different shapes and forms with different opinions. So.
How safe do I feel where?
In your daily life.
My daily life? No, I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I feel very secure. I don't see a problem at all, but again, you have to remember that you have Israeli Arabs, and among the Arabs you have Christian Arabs, you have Druze, you have Muslims, of course. Some are Sunni, some are Shia, thank you. They're all sorts, and people are people. So, no, I have no problem feeling secure anywhere. I would be, let's say, much more careful if I go into Palestinian territories, which is also a problem because we also have Jewish extremists, you know, and they think that all of the land between the Jordan and the Mediterranean should be Jewish. Many people don't think like that, of course, and the Palestinians certainly don't think like that. But there's a problem. Israel has a problem with some more, shall we say, politically active, politically, religiously active Arab organizations like Hamas, like Hezbollah. The problem you see is that there were people living in Palestine before the Jews came. But there were Jews living in Palestine before the Palestinians came. There were no Palestinians. There were Arabs going wherever there was work and wherever they could live. So after 1967, when the part of Transjordan between the Jordan and Israeli border at the time was taken by Israel, created a problem all of a sudden with Arabs who until then would just think of themselves as Arabs, and they wanted to live in Palestine and in all of Palestine. All of a sudden all the Jews came, and and there were more and more Jews. I mean, there were first a few, then there were more and more and more. After independence, over 1 million Jews arrived. So there was a problem. The Palestinians say, we Arabs lived here before you Jews came in 1940s or whatever. Yes, and we say, yes, but we Jews lived here from biblical times. So what do we do now? There is in the Mishnah, there's a very important sentence which says, if two people hold one object, and each one says, it's all mine, so it's simple, you just divide. The problem resides when nobody wants to give up. And I think the solution will be to find at least some sort of solution where the Palestinians can have their own territory and political independence. If it won't happen, I'm afraid we will have a country which will stop being Jewish, meaning Arab. Today it's more or less 50-50 if you take the territories. Of course, in Israel proper, there's a big majority Jew. Roughly, if you take 8 million people, there are 7 million Jews, 1 million Israeli Arabs. But in the occupied territories, or what you all liberated territories, depending how you look at it, there are a few millions more Arabs seeing themselves as Palestinians. And if we won't find a solution, we'll find that Israel will just disappear as a Jewish nation, and who knows what will happen. Before that, we may have what you call apartheid, which is even worse. But I've always been an optimist. I was always lucky. I've always been an optimist also, most of the time. So I think people with cool heads will find a solution, I hope, very much hope, before it is too late. That was a very long answer. There's a question there, I think. Yes? I'm sorry, please speak slowly, and so I can hear you too, please.
It's a more personal question, but I wanted to ask if your father talked often about his incarceration during this time, or if he avoided the topic, and if he did, what did he tell you?
Okay, yes and no. There are people who went through the war and never said a word about it, and there are people who continually talk about it. I'm talking about the older generation. As far as I'm concerned, when the children, my children now, they're all over 50, 3 children. I think I spoke with them when they're about your age, more or less, in short, and mostly answered questions. I think it's very important to let people ask questions and then answer them. As you noticed, I give full answers. So,
what did your father told you?
Sorry?
Did your father, and he spoke about what happened to him, to you, in details?
Yes and no. That's a very Jewish answer. Yes and no, because he didn't speak about the war at all during most of the years that I've lived next to him. He spoke of the war a short while after he came back. One evening, he told his story to friends. I was there also. That was before Helen came back, arrived in Belgium. And he told his story. He told of his concentration camps were at different stone quarries in lower, what's it called, Schwaben or where? Anyway, it was part that was next to Germany, and prisoners were sent there to carve stones wherever it was needed for building roads. He spoke of the hunger, terrible hunger. He also spoke of the death march, and he said, you know, it was after 42, 2.5 years in concentration camps, very, very little food, and people got thinner and thinner and thinner. And they had no more energy, but they had to walk because they had to get to the trains to get back to Germany so they could continue working for the Reich. And he said that when his strength was really leaving him, I mean, he has no more strength left, he kept repeating to himself Van den Stok's phone number and my name, and telling himself, Moischele, Moischele, Moischele. And that kept him alive until he got to Buchenwald, where he got sick with, I don't know, what was it? Thank you. I think it was typhoid, something like it. He came, when he arrived, by the way, he had a very big belly from sickness, and he was otherwise very, very thin. It was something I have difficulty remembering, but that's what it was. Anyway, he didn't, after that one evening, he never spoke of the war anymore.
But it's a good question. You know, many of the survivors I spoke to, many of them said they never told their children about those times because they didn't want the kids to grow up with these horror stories, you know, with all that weight on their shoulders, and they wanted to start a new life and not even remind themselves over and over again about what happened. So there was 2 or 3 people I spoke to, and their children were there with them. And the children, oh my God, I never heard that story. So they were telling me stories, feeling like this is the last time I have the opportunity to share some stories. And yeah, and other survivors always felt very strongly about sharing their stories with everybody. So it's a very personal choice, I think.
If you would had the opportunity to have a conversation with Hitler, what would you like to say to him?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
If you had the opportunity to have a conversation with Hitler, what would you like to say to him?
That's a question.
Well, just thank you. Thank you for all you did. Anything else? Sorry?
You would not say thank you to Hitler if you would have a conversation.
You talk about Hitler. I heard Schindler.
The question is, if you would be able to talk to Hitler, what would you tell him?
I think that is the one person I would not have a discussion with. I am certain that he would not want to have a discussion with me. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you know or remember, in 1961, Adolf Eichmann was brought to Israel, and his, what do you call it, judgment, not judgment, is another word.
His jury, his trial?
Trial, yes. Eichmann's trial went on for a number of months. Most older people, until that time, nobody spoke of the Holocaust in Israel. It was sort of a taboo subject. But when Eichmann had testified and the court brought a large number of victims who had gone through the camps, the ghettos, and so on, older people wanted to hear it all along. All those months, I refused, totally refused to listen to those horror stories. I had heard enough from my second mother, and that one time that father had told me, you know, certain things you forget about, but they stay in your memory, at the back of your memory. I didn't want to hear any more of that. So, to return to your question, I don't think Hitler would want to talk to me. I don't think I'd have much to tell him.
But Maurice, sorry, I have a question. So you have to imagine many Jews in Europe, they didn't want to keep on living where they lived before the war because their neighbors were the ones that basically put them in concentration camps and killed them. So then they had the opportunity to go to Israel, to a different country, start a new life. So I would say most of the people that settled in Israel in the late 40s and the 50s were Holocaust survivors. Many from concentration camps in Poland, Ukraine, and all over Europe. Why wouldn't they talk to each other about what has happened, just to maybe also, you know, like therapy for themselves to you know, because if you experience something horrible, it helps to talk about it. And now you're in a country full of Holocaust survivors. Why do you think was it that nobody?
Very short answer. I think they were ashamed of what had happened to them, and there is very much shame in being a survivor when your family, your friends have died. Happens at war also, if you survive and your friends have been killed. So there was this shame, I think. And the younger generation wanted to create a new, proud Jew in Israel. I was part of that, you know. I never spoke about my background with other kids, but I mean, when you're 10, 12 years old, you don't think much about your past. You think about the now and here and now, a little bit maybe about your future. I think it's not even that. It's just okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys know, but many of the, not many, but some of the Jews had to work in concentration camps. So after the war, if you were a survivor, some people had the stigma that you must have done something bad, you must have worked with the Nazis, you must have helped them kill Jewish people, otherwise you wouldn't have survived. So it was a very difficult time where people felt like they had to justify themselves because, you know, you were looked as a perpetrator too, to some extent, which is, you know, crazy. Capos, they were called capos in the concentration camps. And there was a man who passed away, Mr. Gabay, who worked in the Sonderkommando as a capo in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and he was the one who brought people into the gas chambers and helped clear out the gas chambers for years and years. And he himself said he saw about 600,000 people come through the gas chambers. between 41 and 43, I believe. So imagine, you're surviving the war and then you have that heavy baggage on your shoulders. Yeah. But he was one of the few that admitted to it, but there were also others that were forced to help. Any other questions? Anke, you're...
Have you yourself or your parents ever held a grudge against the Germans for what had happened to them, for what they had done to them?
Did you ask what my feeling was towards the Germans in Germany?
Yes.
Good. I think that's the answer. I said I had a good relationship. I have one good German friend called Ulrich Knödler. He's a doctor, and he used to come to Israel. He suffered from psoriasis, and going to the Dead Sea in Israel is sort of a good cure. So we became friends, and we talked about things. But as I said, it's so simple. There are good people, there are bad people. You should never stigmatize the people because they're part of something. Try and find out. And even there were good Nazis too. I told you about that officer who saved my friend. Yes. Also, you find good people everywhere. Just keep looking for them. And be good ones yourselves, of course. Sorry.
What about your dad? Because he experienced those things himself. And
yes, father had nothing against the Germans, even though he went through all those concentration camps. Neither did my mother, my second mother. People are people. And some people make amends, Again, Eichmann, excuse me, there are, people had heard Eichmann, when he was living in Argentina, said he was very proud of what he had done. He had cleaned as much as he could Germany from the Jews. But not everyone was like that. So my parents realized that Germany is Germany. The good Germans are okay. Some were carried away by propaganda. You have to be very careful about propaganda. Think about the Russians now, what they hear from Putin. You have to be careful with what you hear. So, no hard feelings.
Have you ever imagined what would have happened to you if you were taken to a concentration camp along with your parents?
Nothing. I would have just been gassed and burned with my mother. No, actually, no, my mother was fit. But there's our chief rabbi in Israel, or past chief rabbi called Rabbi Lau, who as a child was hidden in one of the, I think it was Buchenwald concentration camp, and he was hidden, and he survived. No, not much more to say. I would just not have been, that's all. Yes.
Do you still experience discrimination?
Discrimination, anti-Semitism? Do you experience anti-Semitism?
Okay, no, not actively. I personally, no. I never really encountered, but maybe. I'll explain. I was after Mother Helen had come back. They put me in regular school, and one day at break, we were playing in the court, and one of the children pushed me onto the corner of the latrine where boys go, and so my head was open and bleeding. Of course, it was bandaged, and I was sent home. When mother saw me, she fainted. But then my parents thought it may have been anti-Semitic, an act of anti-Semitism. I'm not so certain. People who knew, when I lived in Belgium, people who knew I was Jewish never sort of made mention of it or anything like that. Also, we're talking about 48, 49. Jewish Israel was just being created. There was a war of independence going on. I don't remember. But I was blonde with blue eyes, remember? Yes?
Do you think that something like the Holocaust or Third Reich could ever
Ask Putin. I think nowadays it might happen. By the way, there were concentration camps during the Yugoslavia war. So things do happen. I mean, good people, bad people, remember? Try not to get in the way of the bad ones. But also, people can be carried away. You know, if there's this famous experiment, what was it? I forgot, in one of the American universities, where after the war, they wanted to find out if normal people, regular people, can be influenced to do acts, extreme acts. And some people did, yes, because if there was the man in authority who said, you have to push the button, so they pushed the button. Some people didn't.
And when did you find out what happened in the concentration camps?
The question was when I found out?
Yes.
Oh, I was 6-year-old at the time when I heard Father's story. And then after that, we didn't speak of camps anymore. My mother, Helen, no, women are much more talkative. Nothing personal. But it's a good thing. So little by little, Helen told me the stories. One of the stories, by the way, not from the concentration camp. Do we have time? Thank you. Helen told me that, Helen stayed in Romania with her parents. She was the youngest child. So she stayed with her parents while her sister, Sarah, my mother, married my father in Antwerp. And Sarah used to write once a week a letter to her parents back in Romania. And it was Helen who was going to the post office and take the mail. And maybe because of her parents' eyesight wasn't so good, she is the one who read Sarah's letters to their parents. When my parents were arrested in October of 1942, Mother, the minute that I was already hidden, okay, but when the police came to arrest them at their home in Antwerp, she had prepared an envelope with a stamped envelope with the address of her parents, and she just wrote a short note. And the note said, because Helen told me precisely, a short note which said, "They are taking us. We don't know where. the child is safe. That was all she managed to write. She put the note in the envelope, threw the envelope through the window, and the neighbor posted the letter. So when Helen went to the post office and she got the letter, she tore up the slip of paper. She wrote herself another letter in the name of Sarah and read it to her parents. And she did that for the next 2 years, almost 2 years, because in the summer of 1944, the Jews in part of Romania, which has been annexed to Hungary, were sent under Eichmann's order, sent directly to Auschwitz. First class in cattle cars. As I said, Helen wrote a letter every week. You know, things are not so bad. If a little money, you can manage. Until they were taken to Auschwitz. Parents went to the gas chambers immediately, and she was sent to Salzwedel, subsidiary camp of Auschwitz, where they were making ammunition, and she survived like that. She used to, well, she was always very thin, and she didn't like to cook. She also didn't like to eat. So she said that during her month in the concentration camps, it didn't bother her too much because she was never hungry anyway, while the other girls were begging for food. So, what was the question again?
Coming back to the project.
Sorry, one more question there.
Yeah.
Loud?
I have a question about the political system nowadays. Do you have opinion about the situation in China right now with the Uyghurs and the camps there?
Can't understand, I'm sorry. Could you please repeat the question slowly?
I wanted to know if you have an opinion about the situation in China right now. Yeah, with the Uyghurs in the camps.
You know that the Chinese government, they are putting also people into camps.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Thank you. I don't know. I haven't been there. I know there's a lot of reproaches or a lot of concern about people being sent to prisons. Big subject, so I won't really go into it. But the problem, the whole world, I think, today is that people tend to be more and more extreme. You know, when a regime, okay, under Stalin, nobody complained because, I mean, if you just opened your mouth, you were sent to a gulag. So nobody really wanted that. I think Xi Jinping in China is more or less going on the Stalinist idea that if you want your country to be strong, you have to have a strong organization, or let's say a strong party organization. Same with Nazi Germany. If you don't have a party, you can't really lead a country. So in China, since China has this feeling that they were, until the 19th century, they were really a world power, and because of some mistakes and because of they did not react properly to the Europeans and Americans trying to take advantage of China. Today, there is this very much a general feeling, I think, among Chinese, not in Hong Kong, but among mainland China, that China deserves to become a world power again, and whoever is going to stand in their way is taking chances. I very much hope that things will somehow turn out for the better, both in Ukraine and Russia, and also in China with Taiwan and Hong Kong. I very much hope that things will turn out for the better. But in history, you learn history, you know, there's always better periods and worse ones, and then better ones and worse ones. I think we are now in a period that is not very good. It can get much worse. You know, there are so many nuclear weapons and bombs that can destroy all of humanity very quickly. I still hope that in the shadow of all those dangers, we will know how to carry our lives properly and try to find ways to bridge between all those different views.
Coming back to the project survivors, I would like to ask you, how did you feel when you were asked to be portrayed by Martin in that project, and what was your motivation to take part in it?
Okay, thank you for asking. I was totally unprepared. Yad Vashem called me. They said there's this famous photographer who came to Yad Vashem, and we want to make portraits of 75 survivors. Would you agree to come? I said yes. So I came. There was a nice buffet just before the shooting, and I sat there, and Martin said, okay, it was very nice. And all of a sudden, I was sitting in front of, you know, this very limited space with the lights on both sides and the camera in front, and Martin just behind the camera, very nice. And all of a sudden, he said, don't move. And that's when he took my picture. That's it.
Well, maybe we wrap it up right here. This was a long talk. Unless there's any urgent question. One more question. Yeah, it was very emotional. Definitely the most emotional project, the most challenging, mentally challenging project I've ever done. I knew it would be hard, and it really sunk in when I got there on the first day, and they gave me a list of these 75 Holocaust survivors. Just said the name, the birth date, and then listed how they survived. And most of them, you know, was just a long list of camps. And you read about all these concentration camps. You just saw these lists, after the first day, I photographed about between 8 and 12 survivors each day. Some of them I spent more time with talking. Others didn't speak English or German, and so it was then rather quick. But the first night we were out, Anke and my assistants, you know, we sat down for dinner, and nobody said anything. You know, after a day of listening to all these stories, it felt like there was nothing left to say, and it was a lot of crying all around. The staff of Yad Vashem crying, Anke and I crying, survivors crying. It was, it was very intense.
Yeah, we took one day off in between because we were so emotional empty that we had to make a break. The team just went outside Jerusalem to see the mountains, and we went for a swim because we really needed to fill up our batteries and calm down ourselves. Normally, like yesterday, we are always talking, and we love seeing each other, and Martin and I are working since many years together, and we love to be again with Maurice traveling together. So like last night, we were bum, 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 bum. But then in the evenings, we hardly made it to the hotel. And then nobody was really interested in food or a glass of wine or something, you know. And I remember a situation, Martin was behind the camera and he looked at me and said in German, "You don't start crying now." And then I could see he was already starting. Of course, we both were in tears again about the stories told. Because I think it's a big difference if you see something on TV or if you read a story about a Holocaust survivor in a book. It's a big difference when the person is really sitting in front of you and sharing their personal story with you.
Well, thank you all for coming again. Danke, dass ihr alle gekommen seid. Und ja, nochmal herzlichen Dank an Maurice, dass er so weit für uns alle hier sein konnte.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Degenhardt, für diese wirklich treffenden Schlussworte jetzt zum Schluss nochmal, wie Sie das so ergänzt haben am Ende. Ich möchte gerne euch danken, dass ihr hier wart. Ein wirklich sehr besonderer Moment, Ihnen und euch hier so zuzuhören und so in den Austausch zu kommen. Ich möchte die Gelegenheit nutzen, wo ich den Volker Sonntag und die Anne Linder sehe, die beiden von der Galerie, die diese Ausstellung ja hier im Wesentlichen auch betreuen. Möchte die Kollegen bitten, einfach da auf die beiden auch zuzugehen und Termine auszumachen, mit den Klassen dahin zu gehen, denn es lohnt sich wirklich. Dieser Vormittag heute war aus meiner Sicht wirklich sehr beeindruckend und gewinnbringend, aber es lohnt sich auch wirklich, diese Ausstellung zu sehen. Also nutzt das, geht dahin, vielleicht auch mal privat oder auch die Kollegen mit den Klassen. Herr Sonntag ist, denke ich, jederzeit bereit, eine Führung zu machen und es lohnt sich wirklich, die Ausstellung auch zu sehen. Denn dort sind neben Herrn Gluck noch 74 andere Menschen zu sehen und man lernt aus ihrer Lebensgeschichte etwas kennen.
Ich würde gerne noch was zu sagen. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich es schon ausgeräumt habe. Wir haben, also ihr seht dann nicht nur die Fotos, sondern ihr seht auch rechts ist immer ein Label neben den Fotos angebracht. Wir haben in Israel jeden, der kam und fotografiert wurde, gefragt, was er einer jungen Generation mit auf den Weg geben wollen würde für die Zukunft. Und das lohnt sich wirklich einfach. Das sind einfach kleine, das sind manchmal nur 2, 3 Sätze. Lest es euch bitte durch.
Bleibt mir nur noch zu sagen, vielen, vielen Dank, dass ihr hier wart, für das, was wir gehört haben und euch jetzt wieder einen guten Schultag. Vielleicht habt ihr noch Mittagsschule, also zurück in die Schule wieder.